Hello, my name is Michael Zedek. Some people call me Rabbi Michael Zedek. And my favorite thing is hard to pick one favorite thing. But if I'm reduced to it, aside from my wife, it's got to be chocolate.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones. This is the podcast where we learn about people's favorite things and get recommendations without using an algorithm. I cannot tell you how excited I am for today's guest. He is the Rabbi Emeritus of my synagogue. He is the clergy who supervised my conversion to Judaism, and that I tricked him into scheduling an hour for a one-on-one talk delights me to no end. I am so pleased to welcome author of the book, Taking Miracles Seriously, A Journey to Everyday Spirituality, Rabbi Michael Zedek.
And I'm delighted that you think you tricked me, because among my favorite things is to make people think they tricked me into making my trick happen, which is shamelessly, the notion of saying, ooh, I have a book. Leo Durante, what was Durante? Was this Leo Durante? Was that his name? The comedian, long before your time. One day I read a book. It was sensational. One day I wrote a book. And lo and behold, exciting from my perspective, it's actually in its second printing, which suggests that the first printing is out there somewhere, people probably using it as a bookmark.
It's not so slight that people are using it for a bookmark, but it came out, it was published for the first time last year, right after High Holy Days.
Right. Second
printing is coming up. Tell me about the process of writing this book. Now, as someone who has been a longtime congregant and friend, I'll tell you how I always felt going into High Holy Day services when I regularly attended Shabbat was that if people would just come to Shabbat, like High Holy Days is not new news from you.
Yeah.
And I feel like if people have had the opportunity to attend Shabbat with you when they read this book, it's comforting if they know you, but if they don't know you, it's the opportunity to experience what it is like to regularly go to your Shabbat services.
Well, first of all, thank you. Second, you remind me of a dear friend with whom I had coffee this week, renewing a friendship, because as you know, we don't live in Chicago any longer. We moved back to Kansas City, where I began my rabbinical career. And she said once, if you come all year, you don't have to come on the high holidays.
Yep.
The meaning being you're aware of what in this case, the rabbi has been working on all year, wrestling through, maybe resolving, at least dealing with in some fashion that suggests he or she is trying to make sense of particular issues or concerns. And then I've constantly been fascinated by the whole notion of how we may experience the sacred and how the experience is there to be experienced. That's probably in a sentence and a half, the heart of the effort that became the book that I tried to avoid writing at all cost.
Now, why would you try to avoid writing a book?
Well, I'm only being partially facetious, of course. One, as you know, writing is a lonely business. And my joy was in connection. I mean, I'm deeply fond of a comment that you've heard me say too many times, and I'm going to say it again. This is the 101st anniversary of Martin Buber's publication of I and Thou. If he were alive today, he'd say it the way I'm going to say it. He was, before we had a sensitivity to gender and language.
Yeah.
He would have said, we become what we are, children of God, by becoming what we are, brothers and sisters of each other. And we're having so much trouble on the brothers and sisters part, no wonder most of us are totally confused if we're even bothering to wonder about God. But I'm an only child, technically, so the whole notion of being in connection was the most precious place for me. Might even be one of my favorite things. But to be alone with my thoughts, my reflections, my notions, I tried to avoid at all costs, I think, finishing this effort, which a lot of people said, well, write this already.
Yeah.
So when I finally got it around, I know you'll be familiar with this experience. I would read something I'd written that day and say, this is pretty good. And then maybe an hour or two later, I'd read the same thing. My God, what trash, what garbage. Who the heck is going to take this seriously? and you're going to be out there exposed, and you're not even going to be able to explain, and people are going to say, oh my God, what a fool. However, I decided to take that risk. And one of the lovely things have been some of the commentaries that have come back to me because of this book, which for some folks at least, they found enriches this journey that we call life. And that's enormously flattering. And it's also, lo and behold, a way of connecting in that sense of another kind of community. So the honest answer is, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad somebody forced me to finally get it done. And I'm delighted that it saw the light of day.
And now with the second the second printing, it's not a second edition, right? Do you have some things planned to celebrate the second printing?
Well, I've got a couple of appearances to promote the book, one of which is I'll be at the Emmanuel Congregation.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. And I think we've got 50 copies to give away, and people might make a donation to the congregation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the book after Share Shabbat. And, after all, no meeting without eating. And we are fundamentally skilled in that Orthodox practice.
Yes.
And then I have an appearance in Phoenix, Scottsdale coming up. I'm either going to Dallas or Houston. Forgive me for not remembering which. And then I've got one in Florida, and then one in Palm Springs for PAR, the Pacific Association of Reform Rabbis, and one in San Diego for NAOR, the National Association of Retired Reform Rabbis. Now, for those who may have a little Hebrew, NAOR almost sounds like Na'ar, which is such a delight because these are all retired colleagues. But the word Na'ar in Hebrew means youth or young person. So you're only as old as you. How old would you be if you didn't know how old you was? To quote Satchel Paige, But the truth of the matter is, with the second edition coming, I do have to do some more promoting because I'm sure you're not unfamiliar. Publishers tend not to bother with book tour arrangements or putting any money behind publicizing because they don't have it.
Right. But also, one of the things that I think is unique is, how long have you done your radio show?
Well, we just concluded 29 years on the air.
Okay.
Now it's in the format of an occasional podcast. The radio show that Leah's referring to, we called Religion on the Line. And it was a call-in show. A rabbi, priest, and a minister who didn't walk into a bar. Instead, they walked into a radio studio. And the meta message of the show, from my perspective, boy, could anything be more current, was we didn't always agree, but we always cared about each other.
Yeah.
And given that this is being recorded only a few days before the nightmare of the election on Tuesday, I am certainly far from alone in the anxiety of, no matter what the outcome is, will we be a United States or incredibly angry states of America? And I'm fearful that it's the latter, no matter what.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, High and Mighty, with John Gabris, which I'm certain you don't listen to.
And not only that, I've never heard of the podcast, High and Mighty. I've never heard of the person. Other than that, it sounds very familiar.
He's a comedian in LA, but he was saying yesterday that no matter the outcome, half of the country is going to be upset. And what a challenge that is to just even imagine that no matter who wins, Kamala or
Donald
45, Donald, I was like, what's his name? I have stricken him from the record that half the country is going to be upset with the outcome.
Well, I think he's exaggerating a little.
Yeah.
Namely, 40% are going to vote for one candidate, and we think somewhere near 40% are going to vote for the other. And there's 20% of the people who have opted out of eligible voters who aren't going to vote. I mean, and I think I'm underestimating how many are not going to vote, because it'll probably be close to 70% of the eligible electorate,
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the notion that there are people who are undecided. How can you be undecided at this point?
Well, sometimes it's hard to choose between a cold slice of pizza and a cup of poop.
Gee, you don't have, your prejudices aren't very clear here.
I am very excited to vote for Kamala. I am very optimistic. And I think young new voters are going to surprise us in their drive to the polls.
Well, I will admit to you, prejudice on display. I do not understand how it could not simply be a landslide for the non-Donald Trump candidate.
Yeah. But it is, so it sets this recording in time. We're recording this in a time of high anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I wanted to say about the book and Religion on the Line is that while you have a lot of things set up with synagogues, you are also comfortable in other faith communities sharing this book and speaking with them.
Oh, in fact, one of the most delightful, extraordinary experiences was a Catholic church in the greater Kansas City area bought 600 copies for their members.
Wow.
And it was the book for the church for the year. And I did a bunch of podcasts with them and did a summary thing. I was stunned, delighted, because the truth of the matter is that spirituality does not have a denomination.
Mm-hmm.
It has vocabularies that different communities use to express it. Well, that's quite a brilliant comment. I hope I remember that someday.
It'll be written down. I'll even give you a transcript. Okay, so the book, Taking Miracles Seriously, is available. People can get it on Amazon. They can get it through Bookshop. They get it through their independent booksellers.
I hope so. It's, it may be older in that regard in terms of booksellers nowadays. So I know it's on Amazon, and I know it's on barnesandnoble.com, and I know it's in Indigo bookstores. So if you're in Canada, go to Indigo bookstores.
Outstanding. And it's going into a second printing, and we want enough people to buy it that it goes into a third.
Absolutely. My goodness gracious. What logical thing. By the way, a small footnote about the book. It might allow us to get through the anxiety of anxiety because it suggests that everybody knows when the extraordinary is happening. It's that the ordinary is also extraordinary and how to recognize it. Because if we could take the ordinary for granted less, our lives would be more filled with life. No matter what the outcome of elections or that job we wanted or that dream date, if we took the ordinary for granted less, our lives would be more filled with life. For whatever amount of time is our portion.
Yes. Amen.
Okay. Agreed.
I'm like, and that concludes today's podcast. It doesn't. Yeah. I mean, that is probably the subject of one of the first sermons I ever heard you give, which was when I started coming to synagogue, you would often say that Judaism makes the ho-hum the aha.
Ah. Yeah. That my full cliche on that.
Thank you.
Is the aha is incredible, but everybody knows the aha is incredible. It's that the ho-hum is also aha.
Yeah.
I actually said that in a sermon, huh?
Yeah.
Well,
it locked and loaded for me. Maybe you said it in the Intro to Judaism class. I don't remember. I remember that you say it.
It happens to be a wonderfully brief way of capturing the value added of ritual, and in this case, Jewish ritual.
Well, as I mentioned before we started recording, and as I say on every podcast, the book is what brought us together today.
Yes.
But we're also here to talk about some of your favorite things.
Aha.
So where are we going to start, Rabbi Zedek? What's one of your favorite things?
These are a few of my favorite things. How often does your guest drop into that?
That is, I think, the first time.
Oh, I'm flattered. It's a Shehechianu moment.
Yes.
In fact, the first thing that pops into mind when I say that is a story that's told in the book. Oh, is he shameless, isn't he?
Shameless.
Yeah, and my here's a movie I'm promoting, Johnny Carson. Namely, I used to study once a week with a wonderful retired rabbi who at the time was blind, so I would read to him. And as you may recall this story, after we were done studying, then the real learning began. He said to me, Michael, when do you say the Shechianu prayer? When you're doing something the first time or the first time in season? And to shorthand this, he said to me, wrong. He said, what do you mean wrong? That's the right answer. He said, Michael, when are you not doing something for the first time? So in effect, what I like to, one of my favorite things is recognizing that I can't get through one Shehechianu before it's time for the next one and the next one and the next one. Because every moment is loaded with a burning bush if I could just pay attention. Sometimes I actually do. I do ignore some of them, I'll admit that. But so that's one of my favorite things, is that there are burning bushes scattered randomly through every day. Second, of course, is chocolate. Leah, I'm sure I have a dream life because all of us do, right?
Yeah.
But I very rarely remember my dreams after the moment of waking up. Now, I do have the peculiar ability, if I don't like the way a dream is going, I'll re-dream it so I get a nicer ending. But
That's nice.
yeah, I agree. It truly marks me as something. And I remember this dream vividly. I was reading the New England Journal of Medicine. I do not get the New England Journal of Medicine. At the time, I had never seen knowingly a copy of the New England Journal of Medicine. The front page article was The Health Benefits of Chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
This was at least 10 years before the New England Journal of Medicine wrote an article on its front page about the health benefits of chocolate. So it's a health food. I mean,
Yeah.
clearly, and the darker the better. So that's number 2. Number 3 is the exquisite, amazing ability, the luxury of the professional life that I had and the life that I continue to rejoice in, that every day in my life someone touches my heart. That to me is a beyond words enormous privilege. By the way, I think it's why a lot of clergy get into trouble. It's so addictive, it's so exciting that you keep on seeking more and more and more of it. And sometimes if you don't have good sense of boundaries, you cross boundaries.
Yeah.
4th at the top of any list is the fact that there's this woman in my life who makes me rich because she loves me.
Mm-hmm.
She knows the brokenness, the flawed places, the parts that I try to hide from the world, and she knows all that. And even with that, not despite that, even with that, she loves me. Now, I love a lot of people. I know you're in that category as well. But my God, to be loved by someone, that's a miracle. A miracle. Now, let's see. I love a good book so much so that when I'm getting near the end of a book, I slow down and slow down and slow down because I'm not sure when the next good book is going to come that I want to, Do you have that experience at all?
No, when I'm reading and I'm really engaged, I speed through it because I want to experience all of it.
Mm.
But that makes me think of Billy Crystal in When Harry Met Sally. His character reads the last page of any book before he starts it.
Oh, really? I don't remember that about him. Yeah.
You probably haven't watched When Harry Met Sally 50 plus times. I'm guessing you have spent your time doing other more meaningful things than me.
Oh, well, if you promise not to tell anybody, one of the things that drives Karen, my girlfriend, wife, crazy is and it's on often, if some station is carrying The Godfather, I will watch snippets.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the whole movie in ages. Not the least of the reason being because I don't have that time to set aside. But it's so brilliantly done.
Yeah.
And it's such a remarkable reflection of aspects of what America is that I get something from it. Karen can't comprehend why. I mean, I probably got the script somewhat memorized, not quite as much as Casablanca.
Yeah.
Gambling in Rick's Place? I mean, but I do, to get lost in a good movie is wondrous and wonderful, a favorite thing.
When I saw The Godfather for the first time, it's probably 2001, one of the brief windows when I actually had cable, and AMC had recut the Godfather trilogy into chronological order.
Oh, you mean they didn't have the back and forth even in the Godfather 2?
No, so it started with him in Sicily with his first wife, right? Like, so the first time I saw The Godfather as it was written was like 2 or 3 years later. So I had only seen it in chronological order, and it was like a marathon weekend. And every time I turned on the TV, it was more of the Godfather trilogy. But once I sat down and watched The Godfather, that's also in my top 5 movies.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, if I'm going to add to this list, I suspect you're going to appreciate this one. One of my favorite places to be is Ein Gedi, the oasis in the Judean wilderness in Israel. In the midst of this empty landscape, dark browns and only, there's this exquisite waterfall-laden oasis.
Mm-hmm.
It has a history that I connect to because of the biblical tradition. And it has a marvel of modernity in that there's a kibbutz there and a guest house. And it's just verdant in the midst of nothing. And if you stand on Masada and look to the north, there's endless emptiness, and then there's this green spot that you see. And I remember my first encounter. They're called the wild goats of Engedi. They're ibexes, but they've been isolated there because there's nowhere else they can go.
Right.
And all of a sudden, oh, wow, look at you. You could be a beautiful shofar. Well, self-evidently, to play with a grandchild is a great joy for a grandfather. And breathing in and breathing out is one of my favorite activities. What about you? I mean, have you talked about this yourself?
A little
Let's turn the tables here.
Well, I'm going to have this summer, I took an amazing trip, like a post-cancer grab life by the horns kind of trip. Mm-hmm. And Ronnie and I and our friends Jackie and Clint went on safari, but we took a train across South Africa from Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe to South.
That famous luxury train?
Yeah.
What's it called?
Rovos Rail. It was phenomenal. You would love it, I think. It is romantic, beautiful. There's a dress code for dinner. It's a 4-course dinner paired with South African wines. Lunch and dinner are both 4 courses. They have a vegetarian menu every day.
Thank you.
Cheese. It's a cheese dish. There's cheese, an appetizer, an entree, and dessert, and paired with wines. Phenomenal. And then you get off the train during the day and you go on game drives.
Yeah. So you remind me, thank you. I've had the privilege of teaching in South Africa several times. And one of my favorite moments was I talk about this in the book. I met Nelson Mandela twice. And he's just the single most remarkable human being I've ever encountered. But the story that comes to mind to mesh with yours is there's an organization called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. Yep. And I was when I was younger, I was a resource for them. The international president happened to be from South Africa. He invited the executive committee, their spouses, Karen and me. I was the resource to his game reserve beside Kruger National Park.
Yeah.
Now, first, we flew in on his private plane, of course. Yeah. Right. The pilot buzzes the airstrip to get the zebra off so they can land. Zebra being, of course, the South African pronunciation of zebra. Even hippopotamus is the South African pronunciation of hippopotamus. And for the next 3 days, we slept practically not at all because it's so exciting, so awesome, so overwhelming, so sacred. As nature fills every niche, as the night sky is alive with stars, so you almost understand the Abrahamic promise. Count the stars if you can, because you can't. Yeah. And then, of course, the southern hemisphere sky is not like what we're used to, but it was so clear that we could see satellites moving across the sky. And then among the more amazing experiences was he imported a French chef to cook for us in the bush. And, and Karen and I have our crazy diet. But he met those expectations, even if he's cooking strange things for everybody else. But genuinely amazing. One small example. We came upon a group of elephants, and there was a newborn. I mean, the elephant, one of the cutest things, still wet from birth.
Yeah.
We clearly got too close as far as the elephants were concerned.
Yeah.
They formed a wall. That baby disappeared.
Yep.
I mean, just, the notion of the protective instincts, the maternal instincts, the notion of consciousness in the animal world was reinforced something substantially. They didn't hurt us. They were simply in a protective mode. And my gosh.
Yeah, I want to go again. I thought this will be kind of a one and done trip. And then we only spent one night in Johannesburg. And regretted that we didn't spend.
Oh, no, that's more than enough in Joburg.
Yeah, we stayed at a wonderful hotel though, that was little tiny guest houses.
Mm.
And it was just like, I wish we had more time here in this hotel. And we didn't go to Cape Town.
Mm-hmm.
Ronnie was coming from Israel and I was going to Kenya after we met up in South Africa. So we couldn't add Cape Town. So I regret missing Cape Town. And now having been on like 3 game drives, I want to see it again. I want to experience it more because my brain just couldn't comprehend that the animals just were living their lives in the wild. The way that we see squirrels and deer and rabbits in the Midwest, right? That these elephants, hippopotamus, lions, zebras, the birds, I was like, oh no, I'm going to become a bird person. I just watched it happen to all of us on the trip. We all were at risk of becoming bird watchers.
It's endless animals that we're not familiar with. I mean, just, it was, oh God, I can't think of her name. She was a white, happened to be Jewish. She was in the South African legislature, opposed to apartheid while Mandela was still arrested, often isolated and banned. I have 2 other colleagues with me. We're meeting with her. We get there on time. She's not there. And we're about to leave. She rushes in. She had gone to the bakery. I can't entertain rabbis and not have food for them. So the more important thing, clearly she was risking her safety, her life. And I asked her why. And she gave me an answer that I've heard over and over again with people who are champions of social justice. She said, what else could I do? And I absolutely convinced life constantly confronts us with what else could I do moments. And the only question is, will that find us on the side of justice and caring or on the sidelines of indifference or worse? Helen Sussman. I'm glad I remembered her name. Thank you.
We'll note her in the show notes so people can, and we'll link to an article or a Wikipedia about her.
Oh, bravo.
Yeah.
So you were saying that was among your favorite things.
That was, I mean, I love traveling. So I joined the Jewish people in 2005. I think I've been to Israel 14 times in the last 20 years. So Tel Aviv, one of my favorite cities in the world. I have such an incredible group of friends there through, some of them I met through blogging, some of them I met through the Schusterman Foundation and the programs that they have, as they've ushered me through my Jewish life. And I have dear friends. I don't have family in Israel. And sometimes I wonder if I hadn't converted, would I have seen more of the world? Because most of my PTO in the last 20 years has been spent visiting friends in Israel.
Well, I'm going to pretend I know what I'm talking about. I made a living doing that. And my suspicion is that you might have seen more of the world, but you might have learned less about people. And, I'm a creature of relationships, not of geography. And now that may be because I'm an only child, but as far as I know, that may be even far more quintessentially vital than, I've seen Niagara Falls, which I've seen. Okay. But, you mentioned you love traveling. I hate traveling. I love to get there.
Yeah.
And it's not untypical for many of my gender. There's the anxiety of, if I don't know the language especially, will I be lost? Will I be understood? And it's always a misplaced anxiety,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do. I go to Israel because it's where some of my dearest friends are. And it's funny, Marlene's partner, Alex, was asking my opinion on hotels in Tel Aviv.
For those who don't know, Alex was born in Israel and it still maintains a significant presence there.
And I was like, well, I stay at the Brown Lighthouse at Ben Yehuda and Higher Cone. I was like, I stay at that hotel. I've stayed there for like the last 5 trips. So I don't have opinions about other hotels. The staff doesn't remember me, but as much as I like to travel, I want it to be familiar. I like their breakfast buffet. I like I love the patio. It's a rooftop patio where they serve breakfast. I probably could talk for an hour about Israeli hotel breakfast buffets, which are glorious.
Yeah.
So like the fresh fruit, pickled fish, pickles, cheeses, egg dishes, coffee, fresh pressed juice. I love.
The different kinds of what we'll call yogurts for shorthand.
Mhm.
Yeah. I look forward to a time when that is what we really focus on, because as we're talking now, this terrible pain for so many, not just Israelis and not
Mhm.
just Palestinians, but Palestinians and Israelis and Lebanese and that whole part of the world. But one of the things that is not a favorite thing, but is a confusing thing, is right now, as we're speaking, there are millions of Sudanese at risk of their lives.
Mhm.
Does anybody pay any attention?
Yeah.
As we say in Jewish tradition, oy vey izmir. But I've cited Abraham Joshua Heschel more than once, and if you don't buy my book, buy some of his books. And one of the things he said that gets me through the day is, it may be, I'm going to use a South African phrase, at the end of the day,
Mhm.
it may be that we won't be redeemed,
Yeah.
but at least we should be worthy of being redeemed, which is to say, I don't have control over outcomes. I can only have some control over how I respond, behave, act, intervene in the various circumstances of my life. And I suppose one of my favorite things is that I can be an agent who thinks he's free, even if I'm wrong.
Mhm.
So here's a different favorite thing. Somebody once yelled at me. I find this, I get a certain teasing tickle out of this. Somebody once yelled at me, "Rabbi, the problem with you is you don't dislike anybody." And I thought, of all the various problems to have, I'm glad that's one of my problems.
Yeah.
Because, there are certainly behaviors that I'm not excited by or find problematic or distasteful. But even that person earlier on whom we mentioned, we'll say 45 for shorthand, I don't hate him. I'm confused by him. I think there's ultimately a sadness that has to be associated when one thinks about the emptiness in this person.
Yeah.
But the danger that he brings as well is more frightening to me than the emptiness in him. Well, thank you for ruining your podcast.
No, it is, the serious is allowed. The
Uh-huh.
serious is allowed.
Yeah,
I'm curious.
me too.
Can we time travel to how you became a rabbi?
Yeah, we can, because I actually know this.
All right. Because when I first met you,
Mhm.
I remember telling people, I'm like, he is your favorite English professor,
Oh,
your favorite lit professor, combined with Billy Crystal, who was like at the time the only New York Jew I knew. Like, I was like, he's funny like Billy Crystal, but he has this ability to access poetry like your favorite English professor. You just pull it out of the air, and also Torah. And I think
I want a copy of this podcast, for gosh sake.
I think you went to undergrad for literature.
Right.
And then someone said, what if you take your religion as seriously as you take these poems?
Mm.
And now you're a rabbi. What really happened?
Well, you're pretty darn close. I was teaching English and writing at Syracuse University. I was a young whippersnapper who had a very impressive academic career. And this was in the late 60s. I'm sure you've heard of them.
I've heard of them, yes.
It was right at the time when what we now call the Black Revolution hit the campus. It was one of the last times for a period where a white kid, because I was a kid, could teach mainly black kids and not be automatically suspect. And we were exploring some crazy things. One of the ideas that I had was that you had no business expecting anybody else to celebrate or care about you if you didn't care about you, i.e., I didn't know about Hillel, but if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? People were growing afros. Black is beautiful. I had in those days an isfro. And as I like to say, there ain't much fro no mo for those. Are we on camera, or is this just audio?
It's just audio.
Oh, thank God. But at any rate, there's a significant solar panel at the top of my head. And so after class one day, one of my students, his name was Elijah, for gosh sake, he said to me, "Michael," I wouldn't let them call me professor, doctor. "Michael, why don't you get the hell out of here and learn about your adjective?" And I said, Elijah, Jew is a noun, it's not an adjective.
Mm-hmm.
But you have an interesting point, because I was, in effect, suggesting something that was not something I was living. Approximately 2 weeks later, I thought at the time it was an accident, but it ended up being how it happens that we're now talking about this. I met a gentleman. His name was Rabbi Yechiel Lander. I thought at the time he had come simply by accident. I ran into him on campus. What he had done was I had won an important fellowship that was given to 100 people in the country who showed great promise for careers in college teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at the list of those 100 people, and if they had a name that might suggest they're Jewish, he thought they might be intriguing candidates to go to rabbinical school.
Wow.
Now, my last name's Hebrew, so it's not unlikely that I'm Jewish.
Yeah.
And he wasn't just simply altruistic, because the school wouldn't have to offer scholarship. The school would get paid full tuition, et cetera, et cetera. So we had a correspondence. But, when I met him, he was 38 years old. And those were the days of never trust anyone over age 30. But I liked him. I think at age 32 or 33, he decided to become a rabbi. He was a lumberjack until that time in Canada.
Wow.
Shorthand, he was an unusual man.
Yeah.
We had a correspondence in which at one point why don't you come to the school? And he made a wager with me, which is how we're talking. He said, Michael, on the one hand, there's 4,000 years of the Jewish story on which people were willing to put their lives on the line for the story to continue. On the other hand, there's you, who thinks it's of minimal consequence. Is it possible they're right and you're wrong? Give me 1 year.
Mm.
And that turned out to be the rest of my life.
Wow.
Now, admittedly, I was assumed I'd go back into academic life. But before you can graduate, you have to serve these congregations that can't afford a rabbi full time. And that was my first significant contact with adults. And I found adults were really interesting. Because before that, I'd been a student or a teacher of students. And since I wholeheartedly believe, as in that Buber statement, which I said years ago on this podcast, that community is where we meet the sacred in its most intensive form. If you want to be part of building a community, a college or university, 25% of the community is going every year.
Yeah.
But in a congregation, it starts with birth and it ends with death, and it's an organic, what the real world looks like. Can it be a model for a better real world? And that's how come I ended up being a congregational rabbi. But I do love literature. I do love metaphor. I do love philosophy. I do love the notion that all of those things translate into Torah and how we can live it.
Mm-hmm.
So my love of Judaism, my love of Jews ended up being combined. And sometimes one of them is harder than the other.
Mm-hmm. Did your student Elijah know that you left to go to rabbinical school?
I don't know the answer to that question. No one's ever asked that question. I owe him a debt that I've never paid.
Yeah. Because he essentially said to you, you're telling us to find what's beautiful about being Black. Like, you recognize that there's something special about us, but you just think you're nothing.
Well, it was a matter of indifference. At most inconsequential, sometimes an inconvenience. But Hillel's right. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me?
Yeah.
If I'm only for myself, what am I? Rhetorical question. You're not all of what a human being is meant to be. If not now, when? Get to it already. Come on.
Did you go to HUC in Cincinnati or New York?
First of all, I did not know that we had a campus in New York, which we do.
Yeah.
But it's fortunate that I didn't.
Yeah. Because
New York would have served endlessly distracting, wonderful opportunities and lots of hustle. And the students in New York do have to hustle. But in Cincinnati, I had the chance of really plunging in to learning and to scholarship. And I also spent time in Jerusalem. So theoretically, I'm a graduate of the Cincinnati campus of the Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, Cincinnati, Los Angeles, New York, and Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And I played football for the team, and that's how they recruited me.
Well,
for those who don't know, I am slight of height and slight of appearance. A football might hurt me.
And then, was your congregation in Kansas City your first pulpit?
Yeah. it was 1974 is when I was ordained, and we were still suffering under the recession effects of 1973, which is to say there weren't a lot of jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the few was that met my hopeful criteria of being an assistant to someone rather than learning by making mistakes and not knowing you'd made it until after the fact, was I didn't want to just be the youth rabbi, which is what most colleagues start off with initially. I wanted a full range of rabbinic experiences. And one of the few was this job in Kansas City. And I pursued it, and I was offered it, and I took it. And a year later, through a series of somewhat unfortunate circumstances on the part of my predecessor, I ended up being the senior rabbi of what was then a 1,400 family congregation. And with a lot of people's help, we grew it to 1,900 families. And in 2000, I retired for the first time.
Yeah.
Then I had that exile period as the CEO of the Jewish Federation in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And then went back so that I could meet you.
Yeah.
And in 2004, I came to Emmanuel Congregation in Chicago.
Yeah.
And you were there fairly soon thereafter.
Christmas Eve 2004 is when we met. So 20 years is coming up.
Yeah. But there were no chestnuts roasting on the open fire. Jack Frost was definitely nipping at the nose. By the way, one of the funny things about when I was recruited to come to Cincinnati, to Chicago, Emmanuel, they said, we don't want you here in January. So January, I left. I came back. The lake was gone. It was solid. I said, what did you do to my lake?
It'll be back. We promise. It'll be back. And one of the ways we were able to recruit you is that our rabbi emeritus at the time, Rabbi Herman Schallman, who was truly a lion of the Reform movement, but also like our congregational rabbi who came in and out of retirement to support the congregation. How well did you know him? Was he a figure you wanted to get to know better, or was he already a friend when you came to Chicago?
He was an acquaintance whom I understood as one of the giants of his generation. And he's nonchalantly referred to as one of the Gang of Five, which were 5 German Jewish rabbinical students rescued pre-Holocaust, who quite literally changed the face of liberal Judaism in America. And my predecessor had retired because he said the congregation has no future. And he didn't retire. He left. He took a pulpit in Dayton, which is a city that has no future. And I'm not telling tales out of school. I once said to him, David, had you stayed, it would have been a self-fulfilling prophecy. But Rabbi Herman Schallman filled the interim. And then I came, and altruistically, I wanted to see if I could give him the benefit, because he was so invested in the congregation. It was a metaphorical child to him that he wouldn't have to watch it die. And selfishly, as you know, my father died when I was 18. So I never got a chance to be an adult with my dad. So for me, it was a love affair. And I think immodestly for him, it was the same. I've gotten reports from the family about him being so grateful for our relationship. And I'm to this day grateful that I got to be part of his life and give him his congregation back, because my predecessors were frightened of him because he was so skilled and so brilliant. One of the things, I'm saying this tongue in cheek, one of the things people used to hate about him was he would give a sermon without a note and without an or an or no hesitation. It was awful. Embarrassing.
Truly, I don't think people can, if you didn't experience his sermons in person, it is impossible to understand his ability, his extemporaneous ability to, I know he came in prepared. And he had themes and he had things he wanted to talk about, but he didn't write and memorize. He was just such a skilled extemporaneous speaker, communicator.
And, part of that is just his brilliance. But part of that is also, are you a fan of Joseph Conrad? The English novelist, Heart of Darkness and whatnot. English was his 3rd or 4th language. And there's something that happens when you learn a language later in terms of either an intoxication with it or an inability to master it. And if you master it, there's something that you or I just are too nonchalant about to not know, oh, there's the perfect word, as
Yeah.
opposed to it's just a word, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it was. And you gave him 20 more years with his congregation. He
Mhm.
passed away as a centenarian.
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
he and his wonderful wife, Lotta, who passed within, I think, 18 days of each other.
Yeah, she died, and 18 days later, he died.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, one of the reasons why I'm going to be back in Chicago is not just for the Share Shabbat and talk about the book and have 50 copies that people are welcome to get at no cost, but a donation would be appreciated to the congregation, is that afternoon, the park across the street, which is called Interfaith Park now, its official name, will be dedicated in their honor, memory. Yeah. And there is a marker in there with their a stone version of their picture and their dedication. Because one of the things, he was a bridge builder par excellence, and he opened doors that had been closed. In fact, here's a small footnote that I think you know. When Cardinal Bernardin, one of the princes of the Catholic Church, died, and before his death, people often thought he might have been the first American to become Pope. He was so exquisite a character. Rabbi Shalman and Cardinal Bernardin were very close friends, soulmates. So much so that when Cardinal Bernardin was dying of cancer, one of the last people he insisted on seeing was Rabbi Shalman, and he implored Rabbi Shalman to give the principal eulogy at his funeral. Now, that may be the first time in 2,000 years that a rabbi gave the principal address at the funeral mass for a prince of the Catholic Church, which is what cardinals are often referred to as. And it's only an example of the unprecedented bridge building that the two of them did and still has lasting impact, not just in Chicago.
Yeah. And I think it's such an honor. And, kudos to Sandy Chait, who I don't think listens to podcasts, but she devoted to Rabbi Shalman, devoted to the neighborhood of Edgewater. I think the Park District had never received so many emails from people saying in favor of something that they, I think they were like, yeah, send some emails, thinking she would get 5. And I think it was over 150 petitions and you had to like write a note to send in. So it's such an honor. And I think, I think for people my age and younger, I'm 47. We have always lived on this side of Vatican II. We've always lived on this side of the Catholic Church officially not blaming the Jewish people for the death of Jesus. But that's not it's not so long ago. It's not ancient history. And, meeting Rabbi Shalman and understanding, that what I thought was sort of interfaith, no, isn't it so nice? Like there was such deep work. There's still deep work, important work to be done.
For sure.
But how far they moved like the ball down the field cannot be underestimated.
Yeah. Although what also cannot be underestimated, alas, is anytime you make such remarkable change, it always encounters resistance. And there is resistance. I mean, orthodoxies of all sorts are on the rise in our current environment. And part of that is because ambiguity is real. Modernity has introduced that problem into our lives. Some of us want certainty, and that's a very elusive thing to get. Yeah. And if I've staked my life on this truth, I've got to have a monopoly on it, as opposed to that the opposite of one profound truth is another profound truth, which I think both Cardinal Bernardin and Rabbi Shalman understood at its heart is the real business of our lives.
Yeah. Now, something I often say to guests, because sometimes we'll go deep on just like one favorite thing. Like I have talked to people about candy for an hour. I actually have a whole podcast about candy. It's not difficult to talk about candy for an hour every week. It's a great topic. I say to people, a lot of times the stories we're asked about our work history and we're asked about our love story, but we're not like asked about our hobbies or other favorite interests. But I am, because one of your favorite things is your ongoing love affair with Karen, your wonderful wife. What's your love story? How did you meet? What's the origin story to
Oh, my
Karen and
favorite
Michael?
story! My favorite story! Oh boy! Oh boy! Oh boy! But I hope we got 2 podcasts here. At any rate, so to begin, I was married previously, and thank God that marriage ended, because I'd still be trying to make a marriage that wouldn't work. It was never going to succeed, because it was based on vulnerabilities rather than on caring and strengths. A haze called romance. It was all wrong for both of us. The only good thing that came out of that marriage is, well, 2 things. One is that my then wife forced it to end. Thank you very much. And second is 2 wonderful children. That said, I was single for a while and dated for a while, and I'm having dinner with 2 dear friends on a Sunday evening. They had just gotten back from a lobbying trip to Washington, and they said, have you ever thought about asking Karen Gilbert, Karen's family name, out? And I said, no. First of all, Karen, now this is superficially a really exquisitely beautiful woman. She's a beautiful person, but she also is very pretty.
Yeah.
And she's probably going with somebody really good looking, probably someone who has a really nice car. I drove a station wagon. But if you're willing to give her a call to see if she's open to it, oh, sure, why not? So I thought that would give me a little break. I get home, it's a Sunday evening, I put my key in the door, and the phone's ringing. It may be an emergency, right? Somebody needs me. So I rush to the phone. It's the woman of this couple saying, I just spoke with Karen. Karen swears she didn't say this, but this is what I remember. The rabbi knows who I am. If he wanted to ask me out, he should ask me out himself. So I'm stuck, right? I got to call her.
Right.
I called her. Now, I'm sure you're going to be shocked. I don't like being on the phone. There's something about the disembodied aspect of it that I don't. So we're on the phone for a good 3 hours, which shocked me.
That night?
Yeah, that night.
Wow.
Yeah, I agree. And I broke one of my rules, which is when I was in the dating world, my first date was always lunch. I'm not a bar person.
Yeah.
So, this has been so lovely. I'm looking at my watch.
Yep.
I have to get back to the office. But I invited her to dinner, and she informed me she's a vegetarian. Now we're talking Kansas City, Missouri, the beef capital of the country.
Right.
What am I going to do? So I call some friends. Their family owns a Chinese restaurant. Just recently, they retired. And I said, I picked up one of the brothers. His name is Sam. Sam picked up the phone and said, Sam, would you be interested in doing a vegetarian meal for me? He said, I'm delighted, Rabbi. It's a pleasure, blah, 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 blah. So I go to the office that day, think, I'm going to have a wonderful meal and a date with a really beautiful woman. She calls me and she cancels. Now, I'm not good on rejection. Her mother was beyond upset with her that she did that, because her mother was far more interested in her going out with me than Karen was.
Were they congregants?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is risky, but what the heck. At any rate, she had a paper due for a master's, and her brother had taken a look at it and said it was due the next day. So you can do better. So Thursday, May 15th, 1990, we went to the restaurant. The waitress, Sue, one of the family members, came over and said, would you like something to drink? And Karen said, no, thank you. And in my nervousness, I said, so you're going to be a cheap date? And she said, you haven't seen me eat yet. Now, it wasn't a vegetarian meal. It was 8 courses. One more incredible thing. They just went out of their way.
Yeah.
Right? And I did my fair share. But it's Chinese food. By rule, there's stuff to take home. There was nothing to take home. A small aside, that restaurant before, I think it's actually closed or closing, had on its menu a dish called Karen's Vegetables. Almost sounds Asian, doesn't it? Karen's Vegetables. At any rate, before the evening was over, we both knew we were in wonderful trouble, which she didn't expect.
Yeah.
But I was hopeful.
Yeah.
But the part that's kind of the magic is my fortune cookie was, you are doomed to marital bliss. Now, I saved that, and on Hanukkah of that year, when I proposed to her, there wasn't a ring in the box. There was that phrase in the box. She still carries it in her wallet.
Oh.
And, I'm just a very fortunate man, and I'm fully aware of it and amazed by it and enriched because of it. And that's our love story, and I hope it hasn't written its final chapters.
No.
Yeah. But thank you for the chance to revisit Doomed to Marital Bliss.
Now, was that Sam in the back stuffing
do
it?
you think he stuffs that in there? There's two. You've given me two questions. One is it possible to find Elijah?
Mm-hmm.
And second, should I ask Sam if that was an intentional cookie thing? I'm hoping not, because
No.
the lucky numbers were not my lucky numbers. I'm kidding.
You've been playing the lottery ever since you won in the heart. You've been trying to win in the budget, and it is what it is.
Yeah, to win the lottery, you do have to buy a ticket, and we haven't gotten around to that yet.
Yeah. Well, Rabbi Zedek, is there anything else about either your book, chocolate, being loved, knowing people, being in a relation, is there anything that if we hang up and you haven't said it, you would walk away and say, I should have said that?
In about 10 minutes, I have no doubt that will happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I would add, shamelessly, if someone gets the book and finds either that they want to have more about it, or a group about it, or a question about it, or a challenge about it, I would be delighted. I do have a website, which is www.rabbimichaelzedek.com. And my email is rabbizedek, Zedek, @emmanuelkong.org. I'm open to connection, and I wouldn't hesitate to respond unless it goes into my spam, which I hardly ever look at,
Yeah, so if people are having in-person events, if they are having a
virtual
Zoom book talk, a book club meeting, so virtual or in-person, you're available, and they should go to your website to learn more about how to book your time.
And I've got one other thing that did occur. This was a wonderful process of working with an editor. For me, the language was utterly familiar. My editor knew nothing about the world of religion, so it was an exquisite opportunity to clarify that which was obvious to me but wasn't obvious, right? But she had a great suggestion. She said, Michael, as opposed to calling me by my Christian name, Rabbi, why don't you put questions at the end of each chapter for further reflection? It was a great idea. And she didn't come up with the questions, I did, but I think it extends the reach. And several people have mentioned to me that it actually makes the book even more alive in their hearts. So, Leah, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. But much more importantly, thank you for what you mean in a lot of lives. And I do mean that, including mine. You're a treasure. And I mean that, even though I could have just said it, but I really mean it.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Zedek. This has been just a wonderful chance to catch up and hear the stories I've always wanted to hear more in depth. You can find Finding Favorites anywhere you find podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods. Please subscribe, select auto download, rate and review, give it 5 stars.
At least.
Finding Favorites is engineered by Rob Abrazado. Thank you, Rob. And thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Zedek.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.